I was searching my favorite online marketplace and I saw an ad for a free trimmer. In the ad, they mentioned that it does start, but it doesn't run very well, and it also leaks fuel. Unfortunately, it was only the upper engine portion, but beggars can't be choosers. I made contact with the person and then drove the 20 minutes to see them. Now, the contact was very brief, which is the way I like them, and in the end, I got a free trimmer out of the deal. Hopefully, the ad was being honest. So today's project is this Toro trimmer, and the problem is that according to the person giving it away, it starts and runs but doesn't run very well. The other issue they mentioned was a fuel leak, so we'll have to try and fix that as well because depending upon how bad the leak is, it can be a very dangerous situation. Now, I'm going to try and repair this trimmer, however, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. If you've seen any of my past videos on this particular brand of trimmers, you'll know that I really like them. The reason I like them is because I think they're underrated as a quality trimmer. Sure, it doesn't have the power like a Stihl or Husqvarna, but it has more than enough for what I need it to do, and they're also in a price category that most people can afford. The first thing I want to do is to look around the trimmer and see what kind of condition it's in. For the most part, it's in really good condition for being a decade old, but I do see some small issues. The fuel tank grommet has a tendency to leak on this model, and it looks like they tried to seal this area, but unfortunately it didn't work, so more than likely this is the source of our fuel leak. The fuel lines are very discolored, which means it'd be a good idea to replace them because when they get to this point, they could break at any time. Besides, I wouldn't want them to break in the middle of the mowing season either. Now, I don't think these are the original fuel lines it came with, so someone must have replaced them a few years ago. The purge bulb is also discolored, but I'm going to wait until I use the trimmer and then decide if I want to replace it. Now, there are a few ounces of fuel left in the tank, and if you saw the shorts video on this trimmer, you know what we're getting ready to do. After taking off the fuel cap, you can see the backside of the fuel grommet, and you can see there's more of that sealant even inside the tank. More importantly, we can see the fuel, and it looks a bit heavy with oil, which could affect how the engine runs. Next, I'm going to purge the air from the fuel system and then try starting it. Now, I didn't go full speed on it, and that's because I didn't give it enough time to warm up, but the point was to show you that it starts and runs normally and even revs just fine. As I mentioned earlier, the engine speed was a bit fast, but we can easily adjust that later on. So what do I intend on doing to this thing since I know it starts and runs? Well, since it's working just fine, I do not intend on dealing with the carb. I only want to replace the fuel lines while addressing the leak at the grommet. Now, there are a few other items I could look at, but I'm going to try and keep it simple, and if you've seen any of my other videos before, you know that's kind of hard for me to do. After pouring out the fuel from the tank into a glass jar, it's very obvious the fuel mixture is heavy with 2-cycle oil. This can also happen when you leave mixed gas in a tank for a long time. The gasoline portion will evaporate, leaving only the oil in the tank, so it looks like the mixture is wrong, but in fact, it could have been correct when it was poured in years ago. So here's a close-up of that fuel with the white background for contrast. I'll show you the profile and it looks even worse this way. Since I need to mix another batch of fuel anyway, I'll show you how I mix it, then we'll do a side-by-side comparison. Now, I don't like doing math, so to make this as simple as possible, I'm going to pour 1 ounce of 2-cycle oil into this 40-ounce bottle, then fill the majority of the jar with 100% gasoline, and that's how I mix my 40-to-1 mixture. Then I'll transfer the majority of the mixture into a small fuel can, which I only used for mixed fuel. After pouring some into it, I'll then pour roughly the same amount back into the same jar and then compare them. Now by itself, it's hard to tell that it's lighter, but once I put them side by side, it's very clear there's a difference in the mixtures. Now I don't think there's an easy way to figure out what the darker mixture is at without mixing several batches to compare to, but it's safe to say that it definitely has more oil in it than the batch I just made. The next thing I want to do is to try and replace the fuel lines. However, I find it easier to just remove the carb at the same time. It is quite dirty, and to make it a bit quicker, I'm going to try blowing off most of the dirt with some compressed air. I don't typically use this method because it requires me getting the air hose out. So it did a decent job of getting the majority of the loose dirt gone. However, the dirt typically just lands somewhere else close by, and I've got to get rid of it there as well. I simply find using a brush and cleaner a lot more effective, although I wouldn't mind using the air to dry it off afterwards. After getting the carb and air filter base off the engine, we can start to remove the fuel lines from it. The return fuel line from the tank is connected to the longer port on the back of the purge bulb. Now the short fuel line that goes to the carb connects to the short port on the bulb, and of course that means the last fuel line that goes to the tank is the fuel filter line, and it connects to the port that faces down on the carb. It's at this point we can pry the fuel grommet off the tank, but there's something strange about this one. The grommet usually shrinks and hardens up, but this one is soft and is regular size. That's the reason why it was leaking. That means we'll need to replace it. Now the fuel filter is in really good condition, except it's a little more green than I like it to be. Now that's not going to hurt anything, but I wouldn't mind trying to clean it. To clean the filter, I'm going to spray some carb cleaner on it, then to help purge the extra oil, I'll use some compressed air in the fuel line a couple of times. If it's really bad, you can spray more carb cleaner on it, but after a couple of pulses, it looks a lot better. After that, I'll remove the line from it. However, the line is hardened around the filter, so I'm going to need to cut it. So here's the replacement grommet. You can find these online. All you need to know is the size of the opening. You can either get them with 2 or 3 openings, and of course I chose the one with only 2. Before I try to insert it, I'm going to spray it down with some lube to make it easier to install. Now you can use a tool if you want to, but I'm going to use my fingers first. The fuel line I'll be using is sized at 3/16 of an inch, and to make it easier to install in the opening, I'm going to cut the end at an angle. The first line I'm going to run is the return line. Now after pushing it into the grommet, I don't want more than a couple of inches in the tank, so I'll pull any extra out of it. I'll then cut the line to the approximate location of the purge bulb. I'll then do the same procedure to make the fuel filter line, except this time we need to push several inches of line into the tank, then pull out the line to the opening. I'll then cut off the angle piece so we can install the fuel filter. The last thing we need to do is put the filter back into the tank. If there's too much line in the tank, the filter won't be able to move around. If that happens, pull some of the line back out of the grommet, but make sure there's enough line for the filter to reach the far side of the tank. I'll then cut the line to the approximate location for the carb. We also need to cut a short piece of line to connect to the carb and to the back of the purge bulb. I'll then remove the old line and then replace it with a new one. Now the fuel line is a bit long, so I'll cut it to length, but try not to cut too much off. Next, I'll install the carb to the air filter base with the bolts, and then I'll be able to connect the short fuel line to the short port on the back of the bulb. After that, I'll then connect the return line to the longer port on the purge bulb, then we can install the carb to the engine. Once I've started the bolts, I can then connect the fuel filter line to the port that faces down towards the tank. Leaving the bolts loose gives you more room to install the last fuel line. Once the line has been connected, I can then tighten the bolts that hold the carb to the engine. The last part of the installation is to reconnect the throttle cable to the carb and then anchor the cable. After that, I'm going to turn out the idle set screw to lower the engine idle speed. I turned the screw out too much though, which I only realized after getting it started. The next thing I want to do is put some fuel into the tank and prime the fuel system. Now this part is critical to starting the engine. When pressing the bulb, fuel should come up the filter line into the carb, then leave the carb, partially filling the bulb, and then finally leaving the bulb through the return line and back to the tank. As you can see, the fuel is flowing through the lines like it's supposed to. If fuel isn't flowing through your lines like this, then there might be an issue with the carb or the purge bulb. As you can see, the fuel cap is marked as 50:1, which means my fuel has more oil in it than it requires. The extra oil will not hurt the engine, but you'll need to check the spark arrestor screen more often for carbon buildup. I do want to check the spark plug before starting the engine just to make sure it's in working condition, and it's a good thing we did. It's a bit wet with fuel and there's some carbon buildup on it. Now I'm not going to burn it off like I normally do. Instead, I'm just going to wipe it dry, and that should be good enough for right now. Now I do want to put an attachment on this trimmer. This will put a load on the engine so we can test it under working conditions. It doesn't have to be a trimmer, it could be an edger or a blower attachment, but I have more trimmer attachments than the other ones. The cool part is that this one is meant for the Toro, so it's even got a Toro sticker on it. So I made a mistake in not bringing my screwdriver with me to adjust the idle speed. I'm going to try to start it again and try turning the screw by hand instead. So it seems to run just fine even at part throttle, but when I get back to my tools, I'll probably turn the idle screw just a little bit more. Now the screw sticks out just enough that I was able to turn it by hand, but it wasn't easy to turn. Overall, this trimmer works extremely well and I can't wait to use it this season. However, this video was recorded some time ago and I hate to say it, but I'm not going to get that chance. I'll tell you more about it in a different video. I don't know why the ad said it was having running issues when I didn't see or even hear any issues with it other than the fuel mixture, but I guess they have a different standard when it comes to how a trimmer should run. Like I've said in my past videos, Toro trimmers are not everyone's choice, but I would encourage you to at least give them a try, especially if the chance comes up. Another option as to why this trimmer might have had running issues is that the spark arrestor screen was partially clogged because of the heavy oil mixture in the fuel. This partial clog could cause the engine to spin slower than it's supposed to, which might make it seem like it's having running issues. So my question is, would you consider using a Toro trimmer if it was loaned out to you for one summer with all the fuel that you'll need? Or would you pass on the offer? I don't think I have to tell you what my answer would be. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.